It's interesting that when virtual currency began to be discussed, those of us in the gaming world already had sort of stumbled into it with little microcosms of virtual assets in our virtual worlds. And so when things like Bitcoin and other digital currencies started being proposed and utilized in the real world, I think those of us from the gaming world had a level of comfort and understanding about how it might work and what the pitfalls might be, but most importantly, how it was inevitable.
The following program is for informational purposes only. Cryptocurrency is a new science, so do your homework before putting money on the line. Today is February 22nd, 2014. Welcome to episode 86 of Let's Talk Bitcoin, a twice-weekly show about the ideas, people, and projects building the digital economy and the future of money. As humans, we like games. We like to make games, we like to play games, we like to share our gaming experiences with friends. Games are borderless. A company in Poland can make a game for a Chinese-based platform targeting would-be players all over the world. The trouble, of course, is that money as we know it isn't borderless, and the idea of seeking full integration with even half the world's regional currencies is an immense undertaking beyond the resources of all but the largest distributors. My name is Adam B. Levine. I'm the editor-in-chief at the LTB Network. Sir Richard Garriott is a giant in the history of gaming, and one of the first private astronauts to hit space. He published his first computer game in 1980, transmuted graphical multi-user dimensions into massively multiplayer online role-playing games in 1997. His works include the Ultima series, the Lineage series, City of Heroes, City of Villains, Tabula Rosa, and the upcoming, successfully kickstarted Shroud of the Avatar series. I think it's going to be a series, right? Richard, thank you for joining us on Let's Talk Bitcoin today.
Absolutely. No, my pleasure. I'm obviously very excited to be with you here today as a Bitcoin enthusiast myself. I'm actually, not just pleased, I'm honestly excited to be talking about Bitcoins.
Well, so before we get into the Bitcoin side of it, I want to go back and talk a little bit about your experience with the gaming industry, because you have a really long history here. There are a lot of things that you could kind of choose to do with your life. What was it in particular about, computer games that eventually became video games that made this an area that you chose to focus on?
Well, for me, as with so many still who get into the games industry, it often happens at a young age. I just happened to be amongst the people who were in that very first generation who had that possibility. And so there are very few, if any, people, especially still making games, who predate me in the games industry. So I wouldn't say that it was a plan. I sort of stumbled into it. But it is interesting that, in those earliest days, there were so few people making games that those few of us who dug in and figured out how to make a game on these primitive early computers did pretty well. But then it became much harder over time as games became more sophisticated, as more people came in to compete, as the machines became more sophisticated. It turned from literally child's play into obviously one of the biggest, most competitive industries in the world right now. And I've been very fortunate that, as you noted, I've had a long career. I've had a number of strong hits, and I can claim credit for a few things like the invention of the term avatar that everybody uses now as a standard for their character in a game, and the invention of a class of games, the massively multiplayer online gaming genre. I'm often kind of credited with bringing that to the forefront. I hope I can still produce games and carry that on into the future.
In Bitcoin, we're in early days now. In the beginning, when you got into gaming, there wasn't much competition and all the fruit was low-hanging fruit. So you just kind of started and it just kind of happened.
No, that's exactly right. And in fact, now that you mentioned it, I do think there are some parallels on that same front, too. I was a relative in the short tenure of Bitcoin. I was only came in halfway through the total history now that we have. But even I hear fondly of the tales of the first pizza transaction and other things in these very earliest days as people were trying to kind of figure it out. What I find fascinating personally is how much that figuring it out has gone and continues to go very parallel to what we uncovered in massively multiplayer games. When we launched Ultima Online, we were all shocked and amazed and pleased, but a bit mystified at the same time when the first digital objects started going up for sale on eBay. And we had to sit back and look at that and go like, wow, here's a magic sword that somebody could play the game for 10 hours and get for free, that they're willing to pay $100 to buy from somebody else who has played 10 hours and gotten it for free. And then you had to sit down and thought about it and went, wait a minute, well, of course, it's actually worth $100 because it took somebody 10 hours to go earn it. And, 10 hours of your time at $10 an hour, it's worth about $100. So that's actually not an unfair price. And we began to immediately kind of shift our thinking away from the concept of something being virtual to the concept of its rarity value and how difficult it was to go and acquire in the first place. And as you may know about the history of not just Ultima, but all online games now, this same thing has manifested to a much greater extent. We at peak, we had plots of land in Ultima Online that sold for as much as $10,000 a plot, largely because those particular pieces of real estate, like real estate in the real world, location really matters. And a plot of land next to a city center where you could run a business that could sell those swords at $100 a piece was actually profitable, even when you paid $10,000 for this piece of virtual property. And so we sort of worked out, because we had to. I mean, there was no way to resist the truth of the fact that even virtual items that are limited edition in the sense of digitally serialized or in some way, known to be unique, that someone has to take effort and or time and or expense to acquire, as in mining in the case of Bitcoins. And as demand rises to have access to those objects which are rare, like the real estate land in Ultima Online, of course, the value of that still virtual but limited item rises. And so we, not only did we kind of work through these things, I think it was truly inevitable. I mean, there's literally no way to resist it. It is a fact that these things, though virtual, have absolutely quantifiable real world value.
So the majority of your work has been in these MMOs. At a high level for listeners, for the few listeners who probably aren't familiar with them, these games basically function as self-contained ecosystems where players interact with the environment, but also with each other and other people's avatars, gaining more power and experience. And as they go through, the game essentially becomes more difficult and scales up. So that, in a lot of ways, is very similar to the money systems that we have in real life, except that you have a lot more control over it as a game company. So, in what ways, in your experience, was it different? What parallels do you think there were between the types of systems you were creating and the types of systems that national governments were operating?
Oh, fascinating question. And yes, I actually think that even for a national government, there's a great deal of learning that can come by observing and perhaps meddling in virtual worlds. And here's some good case studies for that. When it comes to monetary policy, if you're going to change monetary policy in the real world, well, first of all, you're affecting people's real lives in a way which they may or may not like. But also, if you're going to literally increase the number of bills on the street by a factor of 2, you'd have to go print an awful lot of money and dump it somewhere to get it into the system. Then it would have, of course, these ripples that would could be profound and permanent. Well, in a virtual world, you can do those same things much more quickly. And if you want to double the amount of currency in the world, you just push a button and there's twice as much currency in the world. If you want to change the taxation rate up by 30%, there's no Congress you have to get votes on. We just do it. And as the world responds to that, which it does as the virtual world responds to that, which it does much more quickly than in the real world, if it's going awry in some crazy way that you think, that monetary policy change we made is creating a catastrophe, we can change or revert it instantaneously. So as soon as it's going out of bounds for what we hoped, we can instantaneously react and put it back on track. And so as a laboratory, virtual environment is a great place to have worked up, these details. And so we ran into all kinds of problems early on because, again, since we thought we were making a game, we didn't realize we were creating this deep intrusion into monetary policy. When we thought we were making a game, we just created currency willy-nilly in the sense of, if you went into a dungeon and you fought some monsters and there was a chest at the end of the corridor, we just spawned some gold pieces, some virtual gold pieces out of the chest, which means the more people who were in the world, the more of those chests were opened, the more gold was generated into the world. And so suddenly we had, rampant inflation in these virtual worlds because we were not controlling the monetary policy. People were gaining, slowly but surely infinite wealth. And therefore the value or the price of, a sword or a house by necessity had to go up and had to go up, in some level of pace with the rate of wealth gain of the average person in the world. And so we kind of stumbled into this monetary policy experiment accidentally, but then very quickly realized we needed the same kind of command and control that nations need on monetary policy as well. And so, it took us a few years to do that. And I think that games actually, by the way, still are imperfect by all means. But again, games are solving a slightly different problem than the real world in that in the case of a game, you are trying to make everyone have the feeling of winning. And there is an arc to their existence of we want everyone to start poor and we want everyone to end rich and powerful. And then when people finish, they no longer exist when they leave this world. We have a very different set of conditions than, again, the real world. So since we're solving a somewhat different problem, the end games and the total policies, aren't identical, but as an experiment to watch what happens when you change these variables and watch the results change quickly and be able to respond quickly, a virtual world is a great experiment bed.
One of the things that's distinctly different between what you do with a virtual world in an MMO and, say, a regional currency is that you actually have uses of the currency in a virtual world where the currency actually goes away under most circumstances. We've heard these described before as faucets. Faucets are, like when you kill a monster and they drop some loot. Right. That's a faucet, right? And then on the other side of that, you've got sinks, and sinks are where, it essentially collects the liquidity and then they get spent on things, right?
That's exactly right. And so for us, the way we manage, inflation and monetary policy is by adjusting up or down those faucets and sinks. Those are the exact terms that are probably the most common term for how we bring value in and out of a virtual world. Interestingly, for the game that I'm working on right now, Shroud of the Avatar, we're slowly turning off. They're not gone, but we're sort of turning off to a large degree both the faucets and the sinks to have more of a fixed monetary policy, more fixed level of currency available in the world. And one of the things we're doing to do that, or one of the side effects of doing that, is that we're relying on the players to basically make all things that exist in the world. So whether I make a sword or I'm a person who mints a gold coin from, having pulled up gold air, mined gold ore in a cave, bring it back to town, forge it into a coin, or bring back some metal ore and forge it into a sword, that object has the history of how it was made. So if a sword was made by Richard Garriott, it will always be a sword made by Richard Garriott. And if I lose or sell that sword into the world, instead of the world destroying that sword or gold in the sink and the drain, we actually just store that off to the side. So you might call it goes down the drain, but instead of going into nothingness, it gets stored in the bank. And then if you go deep in the dungeon and you need to find a sword because you've finished an adventure, we go to the bank and we pull out the actual digital swords that were created by the actual people who created them originally, and we put them back in that chest in real time. And so we're actually, as opposed to having the faucets and drains, we're going to more of a steady state total currency pool. We by no means have any illusions that we'll be able to have it be literally closed, as I just described. We know that we'll need to bring more value into the loop. But by starting with a closed loop, we think that we get one more level of kind of true understanding as to how the policy is working versus just trying to keep the water level about right.
So with regards to real money trading, by the way, that's fascinating. The mechanism that you've described there, where essentially you're letting all of the players make their own market-based decisions on literally every economic activity they do and giving them value for all of those things. That's fascinating. And has that been done before?
Not to my knowledge. I think that virtual items have fairly universally been exactly the way originally described, faucets and drains. And so I think we're making the first run at some pushing nearly this far into a closed system.
CryptoKit is the world's first Chrome browser Bitcoin wallet. It's the easiest, fastest Bitcoin wallet payment system. With a simple one-click install, it takes just seconds to get your wallet set up. And because CryptoKit finds the address and payment for you, there's no more fussing around or tab switching. CryptoKit is more than just a wallet. It comes with a preloaded PGP encrypted social network, news feeds from Reddit and Google, and up-to-date charts from exchanges. Finally, CryptoKit Directory allows you to make two-click payments with any of the BitPay merchants. Once you install CryptoKit, you won't need anything else. For more information or to download CryptoKit, visit CryptoKit.com.